Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. This week, my new CBS Miami documentary debuted on how people with mental illnesses are treated in the criminal justice system. Warehouse, the life and death of Tristin Murphy, told the story of a mentally ill 37-year-old man sent to prison on a littering charge who killed himself at a prison here in Miami by trying to cut his own head off with a chainsaw. Here is a clip from the documentary that premiered on Wednesday. 2 years ago, at a state prison west of Miami, 37-year-old Tristin Murphy killed himself in a most violent manner.
Not a pretty scene.
No?
No. This is the first time I ever seen this. I chopped his head off.
Was it finally accidental or not?
It wasn't accidental.
Okay.
He meant to do it.
Diagnosed with schizophrenia, as well as a documented history of attempting suicide, Tristin had only been at the state prison for 2 months before his death.
I honestly don't know how he made it through physical stuff.
Adult antisocial behavior, psychotic disorder, and psychotic disorder with delusions.
So wait a minute, this guy's an inmate and he had access to a chainsaw?
The crime that sent him to prison? Driving his pickup truck into a pond next to a county jail.
So he was basically incarcerated because he was mentally ill, and the sentence was basically a death sentence for him.
Since the documentary aired, we have received a lot of reaction, but the most common response, especially from those who understand the system, was this.
Well, watching this piece is heartbreaking, it's horrifying, it's infuriating. It's just an unspeakable tragedy. And I wish I could say that it was unusual or atypical, but it's not.
That was David DeFede, director of the National Prison Project for the ACLU, and he offers a perspective on just how widespread this problem truly is.
The prisons and jails in this country are stuffed to the rafters with people with serious mental illness. Many of them are there only because of the symptoms of their untreated mental illness. That's why they came to the attention of law enforcement in the first place. And I think this unfortunate gentleman who was in jail and then in prison for littering, for driving his vehicle into a lake, I think it's safe to say that, you know, someone who had been receiving appropriate treatment for his mental illness would not have behaved in that way and therefore would not have ended up in prison. Florida, like almost every state, calls its prison system the Department of Corrections. And so the idea is it's supposed to make people better, not worse. And we all have an interest in people who go into prison coming out better, rather than more damaged, more debilitated, less able to live a law-abiding and peaceful and orderly life. So we all have an interest in people, incarcerated people, being treated humanely and in ways that will make them better neighbors and better citizens, not more damaged and less able to live in society. I think it's important to realize that you know, prisons and jails aren't the only ones responsible here. In the documentary, it was mentioned, I think, a couple of times that this young man, before he went to prison, his family wanted him to get mental health care, to see a psychiatrist, but he didn't have insurance and he didn't have money, and so he couldn't get the treatment he needed. We have a society where people without money, people without insurance, often can't get the treatment they need. And so people with mental illness, some of them decompensate without treatment. They behave in ways that bring them to the attention of law enforcement, and they end up in jail and prison. That's not the jail or the prison's fault. That's a larger societal failing. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that fact, too.
Well, one thing that Florida could do, for instance, is do Medicaid expansion. Florida is still one of the few states that still refuses to do it, leaving more than 1 million people without health insurance, including mental health care. So that's one tangible result, right?
Yeah, I mean, prisons and jails get, again, not to let them off the hook because they have legal responsibilities that they often fail to carry out. But prisons and jails get left holding the bag for a whole range of failures in the larger society, including our failure to make medical and mental health care universally available to everyone, whether or not they have money to pay.
Now, in the weeks ahead, we are going to press lawmakers and state officials on ways to fix this broken system. But today, I want to concentrate on offering at least some hope. During the 2 years I worked on this story, it was clear to me that many families don't know where to turn for help. Here is what Tristin's mother, Cindy Murphy, had to say in the documentary.
If we could have gotten him the mental health treatment, and if he felt like he could have afforded to get mental health care and the counseling and stuff and go to doctors and get it adjusted, that maybe would have been improved. But again, he didn't have any medical insurance. I wanted to talk to psychiatrists so that we could figure out how to handle that. How can we get him to take his medication? And we couldn't get an appointment. Tristin could. He'd have to do that on his own. We couldn't make any headway with that. We really just didn't know what to do.
There is help out there. I recently spoke to Susan Holtzman, the president and CEO of the Miami-Dade chapter of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which offers family support and crisis counseling.
Our mission is to provide education and support for people living with mental health conditions and their families. So the support, it takes place we have support groups for families of people who are living with mental health conditions, and for people who are living with mental health conditions, separate support groups. So if you're the person who has a mental health condition, you can talk to people who are living the life that you're living and experiencing the kind of challenges and problems and joys and successes that you're experiencing. And then if you're a family member, we have a separate group to talk to other families. And both of these provide the ability and the opportunity to build networks. So you can talk to people who've had similar experiences. You can talk to them about resources that might be available. How did they handle certain situations? Who did they talk to? So although we also have a helpline, you can call us and ask any kind of question you want. We really want to provide the opportunity for people to talk to each other and build that support network, because really that's where the best information often comes from.
Why is that important? Having that support group, talking to people with shared experiences. Tell me why that's so critical in all of this.
It is so hugely helpful when you're dealing with situations for numerous reasons. One, and when we talk about the documentary, there's so much focus on families. So they're dealing with a situation that they've never dealt with before. And maybe a lot of people they know would think this is really strange, what your son is going through, the way he's behaving. But when you can talk to other people who don't think that's strange, who've experienced that themselves, then you have this level of comfort that you don't feel alone in the world. You have a level of support that you're not really going to find anywhere else. So it's extremely helpful.
When you watched the documentary and you saw Cindy Murphy, his mother, and Dennis Murphy, his father, and just what they were going through, what was going through your mind?
Well, what was going through my mind was I hope that they're getting the help and support that they need. I know that there is a NAMI chapter in the county that they live in. I don't know if they had reached out, but I saw the pain. I saw the suffering. I really hope that they had people to talk to. We have another program called Family to Family, which is a 6-week educational program. It's an evidence-based curriculum, and it teaches families how to navigate the mental health system, how to talk to a family member's psychiatrist so you can get the information you need. We recommend resources that help you interact with the person living with a mental health condition. And we have that education program for what we refer to as peers, which is people living with mental health conditions, so that they too can learn about their own condition. They can learn how to advocate for themselves. They can learn how to navigate the mental health care system, which is complex. So we also offer those. So we have the education, and then we have the peer groups, so people can feel empowered, and not so much lost. There's definitely a feeling of being lost the first time anyone experiences anything like this, and we hear that a lot on our helpline calls. I myself experienced it. My sister was mentally ill. She's lived a lot of her adult life on the street due to her mental illness and trying to navigate the mental health system, emergency rooms, psychiatrists, it's extremely difficult. And I did not have the tools that NAMI offers at the time. And it's one of the reasons I do what I do now, to help other families get through this.
Is there something that you think the state could reasonably be doing different?
There are so many things that I would want to change. What Judge Leifman has done in the court system is a great change. To see that expanded would be wonderful. We do have funding now for mobile response unit. So when someone is having a mental health crisis, you don't have to call the police. You can call a mobile response unit and they will come, as long as it's not an imminently dangerous situation. The police are trained and they're with another first responder, an EMT who has psych training, so that again they can go out and de-escalate rather than arrest, hopefully. So I would love to see more of that. And then I think, and again, this is me, I have to be careful. I'm not speaking for NAMI at this point, but to me, what the former prison director said at the end about there being another avenue, I think that's what's missing. There's not, because the jails are not psychiatric hospitals. They're not. But when someone breaks the law, the only tool we have is to put them in jail. And so, another avenue I think would be a wonderful thing, but administratively, again, because I have experience in government, that's a huge ask.
988. I'm just going to keep repeating that number, 988. If you or a loved one needs help or wants to learn more about what services are available in your community, all you have to do is dial 988. And a reminder, if you missed our documentary, Warehouse, The Life and Death of Tristin Murphy, you can watch it anytime by going to cbsmiami.com. When we come back, we continue our discussion, and you'll hear more about how we have allowed the problem to grow for decades. Stay with us.
I have sent to the Congress today a series of proposals to help fight mental illness and mental retardation. These two afflictions have been long neglected. They occur more frequently, affect more people, require more prolonged treatment, cause more individual and family suffering than any other condition in American life. It has been tolerated too long. It has troubled our national conscience, but only as a problem unpleasant to mention, easy to postpone, and despairing of solution.
Welcome back. As you know, that was President John F. Kennedy back on February 5th, 1963. I think it's worth understanding this country's history in dealing with mental illness in this bonus clip from the new CBS Miami documentary, Warehouse, The Life and Death of Tristin Murphy. Judge Steve Leifman walks us through our tortured past.
So the history of mental health in the United States is pretty tortured. When the country was first founded, we didn't know what to do with people with mental illnesses, so we put them in jail. And it pretty much remained that way until about 1840. And there was this wonderful woman by the name of Dorothea Dix. She was visiting a jail in Boston. And there were these 14 men she found segregated in the jail that had no heat. It was in the dead of winter, very little clothes, and they were literally freezing to death. So she went to see the jailer, and she's like, "Excuse me, who are these men, and why are you allowing them to freeze to death?" He's like, "Look, lady, they're just a bunch of lunatics." Ironically, he says to her, "They didn't commit any crimes, so I'm not getting paid to keep them here. What do you want me to do?" So this jailer, sheriff, is allowing people to freeze to death. So she adopted a movement that had begun in France called moral treatment. And the idea was to take people that were in custody that hadn't committed crimes and put them in asylums. And the idea is that you would put them in these small 120-bed asylums where they would be treated more humanely. And so she went to the Massachusetts legislature, she got them to pass the first asylum bills, and they started to move people from jail to the asylums. Well, the idea was to keep them small because there really wasn't a lot of treatment. It was just at least to be able to treat them better, and people got better. And we know why they got better, because their stress levels went down, and trauma is a big part of mental illness. And so we know the states, unfortunately, they want to be efficient, they want to be economical. So they started to consolidate the beds. They didn't want to pay for a bunch of 120-bed facilities. So these asylums grew into these massive state hospitals, 5, 10, 15, 20,000 patients. Very little oversight, if any. And they became these human experimentation facilities, these houses of horrors. The first quote-unquote treatment for people with mental illnesses at a state hospital was insulin shock therapy. They had done some rudimentary testing. They found that many of these folks had slightly elevated blood sugar levels, and the geniuses at the time decided, oh, they must have diabetes and that's what's causing their mental illness. We'll just give them insulin shock and cure them. Well, obviously that wasn't what the problem was. People got sick, they died, they checked that one off the list. But they said, you know, maybe we're onto something. We can shock people back into sanity. So they take them to a room, they'd put a stick in their mouth so they wouldn't bite off their tongue, they would put electrodes on their head, they'd plug it into an outlet, and they would shock the living daylights out of people, trying to shock them into sanity. Well, that didn't work either. Well, the last treatment that they tried was some guy who said he was a doctor by the name of Friedman, designed something called the Friedman pick. And they would take him to that same terrible room where they would do electric shock therapy, and they would tie him down to a bed, and they would take the pick and they would punch it behind their eye, and they would do a lobotomy. And this went on until like the 1970s. You know, a lot of us were still alive. This wasn't 100 years ago. And it also explains why so many people with these illnesses are so reticent to take treatment, because the history is just so horrible. What was his last public bill signing, like 1962, President Kennedy signed this $3 billion authorizing act that would have created this amazing national community mental health system. A lot of people didn't know this, but his sister Rose had mental health issues. She was lobotomized. It went terribly wrong, very tortured, and lived a really difficult life. So President Kennedy and his family were very sensitive to this issue. So new medications were coming out, they were oversold as a cure, and they thought that people did not need to be institutionalized their entire lives. So he signs this wonderful act. Tragically, he's assassinated, there's the escalation of the Vietnam War, and Congress never appropriates any of this $3 billion to set up this act. Well, at the same time, there's a whole slew of lawsuits around the country because of the mistreatment of this population. And the seminal case actually comes out of Alabama. And what the court basically finds, it's a federal judge, is that you have certain constitutional protections even in a state civil hospital. And he tells the states that, look, you have to upgrade these facilities. You can't treat this population the way you're treating them. If not, we're going to shut down your hospitals. And so the states basically had two choices at that point. They could spend the billions of dollars to upgrade their facilities, or they could shut them down and provide community-based treatment. Well, we know what most of them did. In 1955, there were about 560,000 state hospitals around the United States. Today, there's only about 32,000. If nothing had changed, and I'm not suggesting that because most people don't need to be in state hospitals for that period of time, if nothing changed, our population grew the way it ended up growing, we'd have about 1.5 million state hospital beds today. We have 32,000. Well, at the same time, most of our hospital beds got shut down. We had the war on drugs, we had the war on crime, we had massive cuts to housing, and it created this perfect storm. And so we estimate that there were maybe 5,000 people in 1955 in jails and prisons with serious mental illnesses, and 550,000 people in state hospitals. Well, today it's the exact opposite. And so what Dorothea Dix had started to move people out of jails, ironically, has reversed itself.
And so this is where we find ourselves. But as we are trying to stress, there is help out there. And that brings us back to the 988 system. I spoke to Gail Geis, the president of the Florida Mental Health Advocacy Coalition, about the importance of 988.
I do want to give you some hope. I mean, I think 988 holds a lot of hope. I mean, I think we got to back up and get completely out of the criminal justice system. I mean, mental illness is not a crime. It is a brain disorder, and we need to start looking at it as a neurobiological brain disorder. It needs to be underneath whole health, and it needs to be treated that way. It's horrible that we treat an illness in such a punitive way and criminalize it. So 988 holds a lot of promise. You can call, and I saw it at the end of the documentary. I was thrilled that you mentioned 988. You can call and talk to a a crisis counselor that can get you referred to local resources, or maybe send a mobile response team. And we are advocating heavily to get those Lifeline centers funded in a recurring and sustainable way, so that they're ready for the increases in calls and texts and chats that we're expecting. It's 988 is another option for families like mine. You know, someone in my family had a psychotic break about 15 years ago, and I had no clue what to do, and we lost a couple of years, which impacts prognosis in a negative way. So if we could have called 988 just to get the right treatment started, that early intervention is so important. But we're trying to build in Florida that 988 system with the call centers, the mobile response teams, the centralized receiving centers, where you can go for up to 23 hours and be stabilized and linked to services. And of course, the CSUs as well. So it's all a system that's got to be connected. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think that provides us with a lot of hope.
When you talk about increasing funding for Lifeline or maintaining funding for Lifeline, tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Well, Florida has 13 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline call centers. It used to just be called the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now it's called the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And so when the federal law was passed in 2020, they added behavioral health crises. And that is really critical. So it's not only about suicide, it's about any behavioral health crisis or emotional disorder. Somebody has a panic attack, and if another family member doesn't know what's going on, so they can call 988 and get help. As far as funding goes, the state of Florida has been using federal funding. They've been passing through the federal funding from SAMHSA that we've been getting, but it's not sustainable funding.
Is funding an issue though?
Right now, we're expecting about $8 million to Florida for 3 years. Each of 3 years, it has to go through the Department of Children and Families. They have to take a percentage of that for administrative use. You know, we've got 13 call centers. That's less than $1 million, obviously, per call center. I think they're going to need a whole lot more than that. We are expecting nationally the contacts going to 988 to go from 5 million in year one, we're in year two already, to 9 million. So that's a huge increase.
As I said at the outset, there is more that the state and the courts can do to tackle this problem. And in the weeks ahead, we will press to hold various officials accountable. This is not the end of the story, it's just the beginning. And again, if you would like to see our documentary, Warehouse, The Life and Death of Tristin Murphy, you can find it on cbsmiami.com. I hope you'll check it out. We'll be right back. Thanks for joining us. You can follow me on the app previously known as Twitter @DeFede, or email me, and I love reading your emails, jdefede@cbs.com. We'll be back again next week. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day.